I'm in my office on the third floor of my house in Princeton, New Jersey. It's a beautiful, sunny, spring-like day. It's supposed to hit 70 degrees today.
I know you were born in Washington, D.C. Did you grow up in the Washington area or New Jersey? Or
I lived in Washington only until I was 10 years old, and then I moved to a rural county in southern Maryland called Calvert County. And then I lived in Arizona for 2 years, and then I moved to Baltimore, and my 4 years of high school were in Baltimore.
Okay. And then I know you went off to Yale.
Yeah.
After Yale, you went to Hong Kong and taught English in Hong Kong for 2 years.
Right.
Why did you want to do that?
Well, I knew I wanted to teach college eventually, and this opportunity kind of landed in my lap. Yale has a long-standing fellowship program called the Yale-China Association. And they just, I applied. I had a kind of Hemingway-esque idea of wanting to travel and be an expatriate writer, kind of very romantic idea. I was also interested in Zen Buddhism, and I wanted to travel in Asia. And it sounded sort of ideal, so I took it, not having studied Chinese, having never traveled in Asia or spent much time overseas, so it was a shot in the dark, really.
A lot of your stories take place in China, and even a lot of your stories that take place in America are about Chinese citizens or immigrants who are here in the U.S. So clearly that time had an impact on your writing. Can you just talk a little bit about that to me?
Sure. It had a huge impact on my writing. When I got there, I was working on material that was very sort of traditional American realist, coming out of the writers of the 80s like Raymond Carver, Andre Dubus, people of that ilk. And that's the kind of work I very much wanted to do. And when I got to Hong Kong, I realized that I was not going to be one of those expat writers who worked on their material no matter where they were in the world. I realized that I needed to, develop a sense of place and and write about my present experience. It was really as simple as that. So I started writing stories about Hong Kong, and I quickly realized that I didn't just want to write about expatriates in Hong Kong. I wanted to have a fuller sense of the place in Hong Kong. Is 98% Chinese, so that meant writing from the perspective of Chinese people. And it was through that experience that I developed a much broader palette and a much broader set of interests about what I wanted to do with fiction after that experience. And so in my new book, in Nobody Ever Gets Lost, the stories are spread, they mostly take place in the United States, but they're spread among immigrants of various kinds and people of wildly different backgrounds. And a lot of that, it just comes out of the sense of having my own perspective exploded when I moved to Hong Kong.
And speaking of your new collection of short stories, the common thread between all of them is 9/11, which at least is part of the background.
Yeah.
And I know that the stories in this collection, you pretty much started writing pretty quickly after the incidents of 9/11.
Right.
But why was 9/11 kind of a backdrop, do you think, for so many of your stories?
Well, it was really. It was not planned. I mean, I was when September 11th happened. I was still working on my first book, on the Train to Lo Wu, and as most writers, I guess, did at the time, in some sense, I put it aside, and I didn't immediately have any idea about how I could address it in my work, but it just so happened that the next year I moved back to New York City. This is in September of 2002, and the city was very much still grappling with the after effects of September 11th, and I started writing a story about what the city felt like at that moment. And it was out of that. Once I did that, I realized that the concerns that had preoccupied me in my book about Hong Kong really took a very different turn, but they were the same concerns. when faced with the prospect of a violent global event coming home to the United States, which is, how I interpreted September 11th. And so my interest sort of naturally took a turn in that direction. At first it was very diffuse, and then as I started writing more stories, it became more, it began to coalesce more.
In direct contrast to the violence and horror of 9/11, you had mentioned before your interest in Zen Buddhism. And I know that you're a Buddhist chaplain at the College of New Jersey.
Right.
In terms of the tenets or the aspects of Buddhism that have helped shape you as a writer, can you just enlighten me about that?
It's a good question, and it's a complicated question. I mean, I think that in my first book, I was dealing with issues of Buddhism much more sort of specifically and concretely, and in my new work, it's definitely receded into the background. I think that being a Buddhist, being somebody who's engaged in meditation practice, really it affects my writing in two ways. The first is that it just helps me on a day-to-day level survive the experience of being a human being, and if I wasn't able to do it, I wouldn't be able to be a writer or be anything. So in that sense, it's a kind of a coping mechanism, for lack of a better word. But I think there's also a very profound way in which, as a Buddhist, I see I have a tendency to look at things with a perspective that focuses on karma and on cause and effect in the world. There's a real sort of correlation between narrative and karma, and one might even say that storytelling is a way of helping us understand cause and effect. And so I think that's a thread that runs indirectly through all of my work, but I wouldn't say that makes me very different from other fiction writers. I think I'm more aware of it on a religious level that's parallel to my fiction, I guess you could say.
Now, outside of your own fiction, I wanted to ask you about Suture Press. Now, this is something you created with your wife, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why did the two of you want to create this, and just tell me a little bit about the press itself?
The idea for Suture Press initially was that I wanted to do very small editions of chapbooks of short stories. And the reason why I wanted to do, and I started with a chapbook of my own stories, just an edition of 200 that came out in 2009. The reason why I wanted to do that was because I was really fascinated, and I am really fascinated by what a lot of small presses are doing with producing these books that are very beautiful, limited editions, and really they're very concerned with the beauty of the book as an object, not just as sort of a means for conveying content. I was really interested in a lot of the things Ugly Duckling Press is doing with its books. And so I wanted to produce something that was very simple and very beautiful in a small edition, signed, hand-numbered. And it's sort of a hobby, basically. It's a way of, producing books that are sort of, not just wonderful in content, but are fun to look at, beautiful to look at.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about one of my favorite stories of yours, The Secret of Bats, which anyone who reads Best American Short Stories probably read it in there. But that is certainly a story that deals with the concept of place on a number of different levels. And for those who have not read it, you have a teacher who I'm guessing to some degree was modeled on your experience of teaching English in Hong Kong.
Definitely.
But you have a student who's blindfolding herself to kind of develop a sense of sonar and get around blindly, or not blindly.
Yeah.
Where did that story come from?
The idea came from, I believe what happened is that I read something about bats and sonar, and I had the idea of, wouldn't it be cool to write a story about someone who thinks that they can use sonar, that they can echolocate is the proper term, like a bat. And in a sort of unconscious process, it turned towards a story about Hong Kong, and then it wrote itself very quickly. I wrote that story in about 2 weeks and did hardly any revisions. as I remember, I showed it to this is when I was in graduate school, I showed it to my teacher, and he said, if you make any major changes to the story, I'll kill you. And I sent it out, and it was published, and then it was in the Best American and other places. And, it was a story that happened over such a small amount of time that I don't remember very much about the composition. It just happened very quickly. I was in graduate school. I was writing it for a deadline, for a workshop.
Mm-hmm.
So it just occurred.
And let's talk about what you're working on right now, and I'm guessing you can't share too much with me, but you're working on a novel about a character who wants to undergo racial reassignment surgery?
Yeah, who has undergone racial reassignment surgery, yeah.
I'm guessing this is certainly going to attract public attention when it comes out.
I hope so.
Why are you writing this story?
Well, again, sort of like Secrets of Bats, the idea occurred to me. I don't quite remember how. I thought this would be a really crazy idea for a novel. At first I thought it was really an unadvisable thing for me to take up because of, it has implications and risks associated with it. And then I was in the midst of other projects, and I just decided that I'm going to write the beginning of this novel and see what happens. And I wrote it, and then I some time later I showed it to my agent, and she got really excited about it. And and now I'm working on it with great with great intensity. And what can I say? It just sort of something about it just snapped into place for me. It's a novel about race in the United States, but it's also a novel about that takes up the same sort of pan-Asian concerns of my other work. A lot of it is part of it is about the story of a Chinese immigrant as well. So it sort of incorporates a lot of the things I've been thinking about over the last 12 or 15 years of my writing life.
And just finally, talking about your writing life, why are you a writer?
Because there's nothing else I'm good at. There's nothing else that will that will allow me to support myself and to give myself a sense of purpose day to day. It's which is not to say that I think like most writers, I don't wake up every day and ask myself, why am I doing this? Sort of like like Camus' myth of Sisyphus kind of thing. The door is always open. You can always, you always are asking yourself, why am I in this punishing and depressing and difficult line of work? But for me, the answer is simply that there's really nothing else that I'm good at. I'm a mediocre to awful musician, and a somewhat inspired cook, and and a terrible tennis player, and what else? I wouldn't be much good at trading derivatives or building houses. So this is it for me. This is my one way to contribute to the world.